Good evening, everybody. It's Brian reporting to you from Norwalk, Connecticut. It's been a beautiful weekend, and I'm excited to be sharing my book debrief with you. It is based on Max de Pree's Leadership Is an Art, which I found to be a very fascinating and very relatable book on so many different levels. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of the things that I took away from it and how it impacts me. It's interesting, I'm finding myself toggling between the content of delivering, insightful information and the technology platform. So this is, again, something new for me. I had shared with you guys when we did the Google group or Google Hangout a couple weeks back that it was a first. So this is also a first for me. And it's good practice, I guess. I've done video interviewing and I've done a fair amount of public speaking, but I haven't done any recording or posting on any social media. So here goes. One of the things that I want to share right off the bat is this idea of a quote that actually came from page 100 in the book, which is a little more than halfway through. And I'm going to read it to you. And what I'm fascinated by it says, in the end, it is important to remember that we cannot become what we need to be by remaining what we are. In the end, it is important to remember that we cannot become what we need to be by remaining what we are. The reason I kind of start from this place is one of these things that's interesting about continuing to see where my own intuition, my own instincts, and my own experience can be really informative. And then there's that wrestle that I've shared with many of you in our first weekend, that it's that notion of having a really clear inner wisdom and then second guessing or doubting or questioning that. So that quote on page 100 jumped off the page. And interestingly enough, it was a Monday morning before work that I had read that, and then I went to work that day, and at some point I just sent a simple note off to the team that I work with at Aetna and said, here was something that I read that inspired me, and I thought I would pass it along, because the work of diversity and inclusion is very much about what got us here can't get us there, and the notion of standing up in a very strong place for change and for transformation. And why I'm sharing that is that I got a lot of positive feedback from the immediate team about what those words resonated for them, represented and resonated. And then later on, as I was winding down all of my note-taking and all of the book completed, etc., I decided I wanted to research a little bit more about who is this man, the author, the Herman Miller leader, Max de Pree. And you can Google anything these days, and immediately there are pictures of the man with this quote from page 100 as one of the quotes from the book that is most attributed to him. And it's sort of like, it's kind of profound, it's kind of simple, and it's one of these things where it's like, why did that immediately resonate for me? So I kind of share that again on the journey that we're sharing together from the perspective of trusting instincts. I'm trying to get better at trusting mine, listening to that inner wisdom, and also realizing that there are kind of lessons everywhere. So you read a book that's, 150 pages long, and it's packed with amazing content, but it's very approachable, it's very easy to read, and I think it's something that everybody can find some resonance with. I certainly did. So I kind of broke it down from a summary, and this is definitely me at the risk of running too long-winded, but I'm going to do my best to kind of jump back and forth between key words, key quotes or pullouts from the book, and then some anecdotes or things that hit home for me. So one of the first things is this idea of leadership as an art. And as early as page 3, makes perfect sense since that's in the book title, they actually just describe, and I think again, it's very appropriate for us as students and as future leaders and as present day leaders. Leadership is an art, something to be learned over time, not simply by reading books. Leadership is more tribal than scientific, more a weaving of relationships than amassing of information. And in that sense, I don't know how to pin it down in every detail. And I think this is him on page 3 basically saying, as we all should be mindful, humble, in different leadership and communication, and I certainly am aware of this notion of not having to have all the details figured out. The ability to recognize that it's a journey, that it's constantly unfolding, and that it's an invitation for everybody to engage where they are and who they're with in order to make that impact. The other thing that really hit home for me right out of the gate, it comes up on page 9, and he immediately starts to talk about this idea of diversity and inclusion. And as you guys know, I'm a diversity and inclusion professional in my corporate life. I think that I started to awake to my diversity and inclusion journey as a human being very early in life, even though I didn't have language to describe it. And I appreciate that this book, written in 1987 by a leader who was already sort of seasoned in both his profession and his tenure and his age, in his geography of living in middle America, had such insight around the value of people and the value of diversity, when in essence 30 years ago, if at all, it was being talked about more through a lens of compliance and managing representation in numbers, at least in the corporate context. And the idea of diversity and inclusion as a strength or differentiator was yet to really come into the mainstream vernacular. So on page 9, he says, the simple act of recognizing diversity in corporate life helps us to connect the great variety of gifts that people bring to the work and service of the organization. Diversity allows each of us to contribute in a special way to make our special gift a part of the corporate effort. So again, depending on where you are in your work life, whether you're a solopreneur, whether you're a part of a smaller entrepreneurial venture, a consultant, or whether you're a part of a large corporate enterprise or anything in between, it's this notion of the relationships, the people, the diversity that actually bring the uniqueness to the problem solving and to the engagements, and that at the heart of it all is relationships, which for me is something that I'm just really starting to own as a personal investment and differentiator, because I think that I've been in cultures that value relationships and I've been in cultures that don't value relationships. And it's the opportunity to continue to put people at the center of it all. And I think it's something that I just sort of evolved to do naturally. But now I realize how there's some type of inner compass, again, that's guiding me towards making these choices that are offering possibly a better and more open opportunity for others to contribute. So to that idea, there's this notion of people holistically. What are artful leaders responsible for? Surely we need to include people. People are the heart and spirit of all that counts. Without people, there is no need for leaders. So this piece, again, is this notion of a full-on acknowledgement of what many people say in canned sort of corporate environments of, we value people. People are at the center of it all. We can't do it without people. And it almost in some ways, to me, lands as something that's like a lip service, not necessarily something that really is truly aligned when people feel like a number, or people don't feel like their contributions count, or people don't feel seen, or the bottom line seems to be the most articulated value. And those who can treasure and value and capitalize on the people tend to get further with maybe more harmony and more competitive advantage if we're talking about, driving business enterprise. This notion of creating space. So again, as a leader, and this is really, I love that other thing that I mentioned to you about the heart and the spirit, because it's sort of dancing with this duality of the practical and the less quantified, the less containable, the less organized matters of the heart and the soul and the spirit, and that notion that we can create space for people to bring their best, to realize their potential, to make mistakes, to be vulnerable. And listening provides that invitation, and asking questions provides that, and allowing people to explore and feel that there's a welcome openness to that. And that's what I want to embody as a leader. That's some of the practices I put in when I'm interfacing with a customer, a client, a partner, an external vendor, which is a word that drives me kind of crazy, but it's like, so when it keeps talking about this idea of we need to give each other the space to grow, to be ourselves, to exercise our diversity. So again, he's reinforcing this. We need to give each other space that we may both give and receive such beautiful things as ideas, openness, dignity, joy, healing, and inclusion. And it isn't until much later in the book, from an integration perspective, he talks about the idea of really allowing the whole self. And it's campaigns that we're dealing with, especially like when it comes to individuals with disabilities or comes to LGBT inclusion, this notion of bringing your whole self to work. If you don't have to compartmentalize or hide in any way, you're not putting energy against that. So therefore, you're going to be able to bring maximum energy and engagement in a work environment. But you're also going to feel like you don't have to spend energy to manage something that's a drain on your energy. So therefore, from an innovation and a spirit perspective, you're bringing forward much more collaborative energy, much more incremental ideas, and really capitalizing on that. I'm just looking at the time and I'm seeing 13 minutes recorded already, and it's like, wow. This might just be a test and I might be starting over. Values is a linking theme, and I think this is something that's really important. It's like, what are the values of the company? What are the things that the leaders want to set as a tone? And it really is just a beginning. It's an articulation that gives a springboard for other. So I just sort of thought about some of mine in terms of this notion of fairness. I'm always about fairness. And that can come to life in different ways, especially whether you're talking about equality or fair treatment. And equal treatment is one thing, but not everybody needs to be in the cookie cutter way treated the same. There's integrity. So it's sort of like, who are you? What are your stated words? What are your stated deliverables? What have you signed up for? And how do you meet those? The creativity. It's another value that I really embody as well as treasure in others, because I always have a pretty distinct point of view, but when somebody's able to articulate something that is counterpoint or asking to explore something, all of a sudden something else opens up and I'm receptive to that, and I can usually generate more energy off of that and build and move. Okay, so this is going to be interesting because I don't know if I'm going to be able to splice this back together with the first segment, but I'll do my best. Hopefully you guys are finding this engaging, and my enthusiasm is not solitary. I think that's one of the things, even just taking a pause, reviewing the first piece and sort of looking at my notes to say, how do I pare this down even more, is how in this process for me, I get enthusiastic and excited about a lot of ideas. And probably the opportunity that exists that I can continue to ask for your help and explore is the notion of how to boil it down, how to figure out, okay, you're up to a lot of stuff. What's going to make... I think this is take 4. Role of the leader is to communicate and articulate vision, mission, objectives, values, which then in turn liberate those who are on the work team, who are now armed with information to engage, to bring their diversity, to bring their unique thinking, to bring their skills, and to move forward and have an ownership stake, an accountability stake. And so this idea of leadership as an art, it's the synthesis of all these components working mindfully to allow people to reach their potential, to find their potential, to be contributing. I think some of the things that are also evident that, you know, Mr. Pree is proud of is that, you know, the Herman Miller Company back in the late 80s was one of very few companies where, as a differentiated corporate model, anybody who'd served as an employee with the company for a year or more was a stockholder, which therefore meant that they were an owner. And therefore they had a different level of commitment, a different level of engagement, a sense of pride. And as a result, it creates a different contribution to the organization. There's also a lot of illustrations within Max's philosophy shared in the book, this notion that has been proven time and again, and companies have been working towards this, which is this notion of doing well by doing good. Especially with a multi-generational workforce, we talk about this in my day-to-day job all the time. Different generations are motivated by different circumstances and contexts, and the millennials, who are a huge component of the workforce now, have a different expectation set for how it's going to go. And they look for measures around culture, and they look for the ability to contribute, and they look for an organization that stands for something more. Because there's a fundamental belief set that by creating sustainable systems, by giving back to the communities that you serve, by being mindful of the resources that you utilize, you can still be successful and profitable. And maybe in some ways, the older generations might perceive that as naive. But I think it's the power of thinking that there's a different way that it could work, which comes back to the heart and spirit concept and the notion that it can't be a heartless endeavor. It has to honor the total person. I'm going to try to find another quote that speaks to this. Declaratively, this says, we at Herman Miller acknowledge that issues of the heart and spirit matter to each of us. They matter in our families, in our work, and in our extracurricular activities. We are emotional creatures trying through the vehicles of product and knowledge and information and relationships to have an effect for good on one another, both personally and through what we can do to improve the environment. And I think that this is something that also really just hits home for me, because I have never been able to divorce my professional self from my emotional self. And I think some people are better at compartmentalizing and not being as emotionally reactive, or not being as emotionally tuned in, or just being focused on the job, the task, the situation. And I've always been wrestling with environments that either honor and enable and invite my emotional capacities to bring forward ideas, solutions, versus those that don't. So it's interesting because for me it's been non-negotiable, and yet I've still had to adapt, and I've sought purposefully and intentionally environments that will allow me to be more of myself. And this book is sort of, again, just speaking to me directly on the idea that what I have to offer is valuable, and how I show up is valuable, and that my total composition, mental faculties, intellect, skills, past experiences, all the things that are more documented qualifications, combined with the personal and the more emotional aspect, is what really is what I deliver uniquely me. Makes me a better. Okay, now we're going to bring it all to conclusion here. Thanks for sticking with me. I would love to talk about a whole host of other topics that got sparked for me. I tried to put it into one word chunks, and it was a way to organize it, and there's so much rich content, whether it's the art, the diversity, people, creating space, enabling people to realize their potential, values, this whole idea of participative management, which had me then down a rabbit hole looking at Harvard Business Review articles from the 70s that talked about this idea of transparency and workforce employees having a say in what was happening, and a voice and skin in the game, basically. Participative management. Integration, I've touched on. Creativity. The idea of creativity can be daunting for many because creativity is almost synonymous with change. The more innovative and the more creative we are, the more change we're driving, which means that there's inherently discomfort. The idea of accountability, caring, commitment, discipline, this notion of goals versus potential seems so simple, but it's like an environment where a leader is enabling, is this notion that you could provide people the opportunity to be and see and do more than just deliver goals, but to actually deliver on and experience their fuller potential. So many great nuggets. That's why I think I'm tripping on myself here. There's also a whole component around faith and trust. It's not necessary for us to understand completely what the others do or are accountable for, but we could nevertheless be wholeheartedly committed to each other's role and each other's success. So sort of from a articulation of, I don't need to know what you do and you don't need to know what I do, but if we have respect and we have trust and we have faith in each other's contribution and ability, then you're doing your thing and I believe in it, and I'm doing my thing and you believe in it, and we're supporting each other even in a space of unknowing. So we must trust one another to be accountable for our own assignments. So again, this accountability idea keeps coming back. In summary, and I think this is the third time I said I was going to summarize, but it's just this piece around focusing on people, and this notion of inclusion, which is the build to diversity, which is the sense of inviting all and including all, and then driving with that focus towards maximizing outcomes asking questions, building intimacy and building trust that then delivers better results. So I see it as a rallying cry coming from Max to Pree. I see it as something that I've been discovering on my own that's now being reinforced. I see this idea, and there's a piece in the book as well, around declaring beliefs. So again, the language of a leader is, what do you stand for, what are you up to, and how are you going to make that happen and inspire others to follow you or to contribute and partner with you to make that a reality. So I look forward to seeing everybody in one short week, and I look forward to any feedback that you guys have or questions you have relative to this content. It's pretty inspiring. It's very easy read, so grab the book and check it out for yourself.